Hello, my name is Jared Gant, and on behalf of Team Topaz Carbon Fit, I want to thank you for joining us today. Our team consists of 5 members: Giselle Leon, Gerald Barclay, Jonathan Gaffer, Sia Kaminor, and myself. Today, we're presenting our macro environmental analysis focused on public health forces and their impact on marketing strategy in the bike industry. Over the next 25 minutes, we'll walk you through 5 interconnected sections that together tell a complete story about how public health shapes business decisions in both simulated and real-world environments. Before we dive in, I want to give you a brief preview of what to expect, because each section builds on the last, and understanding the structure will help you follow the argument we're making as a team. Our presentation is organized into 5 sections. Giselle will open by introducing public health as a macro environmental force, explaining what it is, why it matters to marketing strategy, and how it impacts the 4 Ps of the marketing mix, and what real-world examples look like in practice. Her section lays the theoretical foundation that everything else is built on. Gerald will then take us into the heart of our simulation experience, comparing how the marketplace simulation treated public health forces versus how the real world actually works. He'll walk us through what the simulation simplified, what was missing, and how those simplifications directly shape the strategic decisions our team made quarter by quarter. Jonathan will shift our focus from limitations to opportunities. Using our simulation data and real-world public health trends, he'll show how companies like ours can proactively leverage health-driven consumer behavior to grow demand, strengthen brand positioning, and enter new market segments at the right time. Sia will then address the other side of that equation, risk. She'll present 3 alternative marketing strategies that Topaz Carbon Fit could have used to protect itself against public health disruptions, drawing on our Q4 experience and real-world examples from companies that planned ahead and outperformed their competitors as a result. Finally, I'll return at the end to bring everything together and close with a question that ties our simulation journey directly to the real-world challenge every company faces.
I'll begin by introducing our assigned macro environmental force, public health, and explaining why it is important for marketing strategy. Public health refers to conditions, risks, and policies related to population health and safety that exist outside of firms' control. These include disease outbreaks, chronic health trends, workplace safety standards, and public health regulations. Although firms cannot control these forces, they must adapt their marketing strategies in response. What public health means in a business context. From a business and marketing perspective, public health focuses on protecting consumers, employees, and communities from health risks. This includes government guidelines, health advisories, and societal expectations around safety and wellness. Events such as pandemics, rising rates of obesity, or concerns around environmental health directly influence consumer behavior and how companies design, position, and promote their products. Why public health matters to marketing. Public health is especially important to marketing because it directly shapes consumers' attitudes, risk perception, and trust. This is particularly true for our simulation project business, since cycling is closely associated with physical health, outdoor activity, and wellness. Additionally, when public health concerns increase, consumers become more attentive to safety, product quality, and responsible brand behavior. As a result, marketing strategies must adjust to emphasize trustworthiness, social responsibility, and how the product aligns with healthier lifestyles. Impact on the marketing mix. From a product perspective, firms may emphasize safety features, comfort, and designs that support long-term physical well-being and injury prevention. Pricing decisions may also reflect public health conditions, such as economic strain during health crisis, requiring companies to balance affordability with perceived value. Distribution strategies can shift as well, particularly when access to physical retail locations is limited, making online channels and direct-to-consumer options more important. Finally, promotional messaging often places less emphasis on performance alone and instead highlights well-being, safe usage, and social responsibility. Real-world public health forces have led to several important changes in how business operate and market their products. During the COVID-19 pandemic, consumer behavior shifted significantly, with greater demand for safe, individual, and outdoor activities. At the same time, there was an increased focus on workplace and product safety, pushing companies to demonstrate responsibility and compliance with health standards. Many firms also adopted more health-oriented branding and messaging, emphasizing wellness, protection, and quality of life. Finally, public health concerns accelerated the use of digital and contactless channels, including online sales and virtual customer engagement, reshaping how companies reach and serve customers.
Let's focus on how the simulation simplified public health forces, what was missing compared to the real world, and how that actually impacted the way we made decisions. In the simulation, we were operating in a very controlled environment where demand was mostly driven by our internal decisions, like pricing, advertising, and product design. But in the real world, public health forces, things like pandemics, lifestyle changes, and government's policies can significantly influence demand and shift how companies compete. In the simulation, public health forces were absent, so demand behaved in a stable, predictable way from quarter to quarter. When we made improvements, whether it was better ads, stronger brand positioning, or expanding into new cities, we could expect a direct and an immediate response in demand. There weren't any sudden disruptions, external shocks, or need to adjust for changes in consumer behavior outside of the variables we controlled. Because of that, we were able to operate with a high level of confidence in our projections. For example, when we increased our SEM spend and expanded in Q5, we were able to scale aggressively because we assumed demand would respond accordingly. In reality, that level of predictability is rarely the case. What's missing from the simulation is the complexity of real world situations, like public health forces. In reality, you have events like pandemics that can rapidly increase or decrease demand. You also have long term lifestyle shifts, like people becoming more health conscious or incorporating biking into their daily routines. On top of that, governments play a role through policies that promote biking infrastructure, sustainability, and reduced emissions. Those decisions can directly impact where and how demand grows. None of those factors were present in the simulation. There were no regional differences driven by health trends, no sudden increase in demand tied to behavioral shifts, no constraints like supply chain disruptions that often come with global events. So while the simulation gave us a clean environment to make decisions, it removed a major layer of uncertainty that companies constantly have to deal with in the real world. Because those public health forces were missing, it changed how we approach strategy. We didn't need to plan for uncertainty or build flexibility into our decisions. Instead, we focused on optimizing performance within a stable system. For example, our marketing was heavily focused on product features, things like speed, comfort, and design. We didn't need to emphasize health benefits, sustainability, or lifestyle positioning, which normally would be important drivers of demand. It also affected how we scaled. When we made adjustments after Q4, where we dropped from 1 to 5, we were able to respond aggressively by increasing SEM spend, expanding into more cities, and growing our sales force. By Q5, that led to a strong recovery back to the number one position. That kind of rapid recovery assumes that demand is consistent and will respond immediately to our actions, which is something the simulation allows, but the real world does not always support that. If public health forces were fully incorporated, our strategy would have looked different. The first example is a pandemic type event. In that scenario, you likely see a surge in demand for bikes, especially the recreation and commuting segments, as people look for alternatives to gyms and public transportation. If that had been part of the simulation, we would have expanded earlier instead of waiting for Q5 to scale aggressively. We would have also entered the work segment sooner. In our actual performance, we delayed entering that segment, which we later identified as a mistake. In a real world situation where commuting behavior shifts quickly, that delay would have been even more costly. So, overall, a pandemic scenario would have required us to move faster, shift our messaging, and prioritize different segments earlier in the game. A second example is government driven public health initiatives, like cities investing in bike lanes or promoting cycling to reduce congestion and improve public health. In that type of environment, demand wouldn't just increase, it would increase unevenly across regions depending on where those policies were implemented. If that level of complexity existed in the simulation, we would have made more targeted geographic decisions instead of expanding more evenly across markets. We likely would have prioritized cities or regions with stronger infrastructure support and higher expected adoption rates. This also would have impacted our product strategy. We may have focused more on utility and commuting bikes earlier instead of concentrating primarily on performance based segments. And from a marketing standpoint, we would have aligned messaging with sustainability and long term health benefits rather than focusing primarily on product attributes. Overall, the simulation simplified decision making by removing those external forces. It allowed us to operate in a predictable environment and focus on optimization. But in the real world, public health forces would require a more adaptive strategy, earlier decision making, and a stronger alignment between marketing, product design, and external conditions.
Building on the previous sections, we now shift from limitations to opportunities. While the simulation excluded public health forces, in the real world, those forces can be actively leveraged to improve marketing performance. Public health forces don't emerge randomly. The COVID-19 pandemic shifted people away from the gyms towards outdoor activity. Government health advisories encouraged exercise to combat rising obesity. Rising chronic disease awareness pushed consumers towards active lifestyles. These are forces no firm controls, but every firm must respond to. These shifts map directly onto our simulation with customer needs and wants, with exercise, recreation, fun, adventure, and sport, all seeing demand patterns consistent with the real-world public health trends. The work segment reflects this too, as cycling became a practical alternative to public transit. If our team had incorporated these dynamics, we could have made more proactive decisions from the start. One method to leverage public health is through product strategy. Instead of focusing primarily on performance attributes, we could have aligned our bikes more closely with public health trends, specifically the growing consumer demand for comfort, ease of use, and long-term usability, driven by the pandemic-era lifestyle shifts and rising health consciousness. For example, if we had prioritized features that support everyday use and accessibility, such as the R&D investments in the performance bike computer, the extra smooth derailleur, puncture-resistant tires, and high-intensity LED lights, we could have captured more demand from casual riders and health-conscious consumers in the work and recreation segments, and not just the performance-focused segments like mountain and speed, which were our main R&D focus from Q5 to Q8. These features would have had a broader appeal across all market segments, allowing us to spread costs and increase overall profitability, while simultaneously aligning our brand with the public health forces shaping real-world consumer behavior. Public health can also be leveraged through marketing and brand positioning. In the simulation, our advertising focused heavily on product features, especially by Q6 through Q8, where our performance features such as the racing tires from R&D became available. However, in a real-world environment influenced by public health trends, messaging would have to shift towards lifestyle benefits such as fitness and exercise, outdoor activity, and overall well-being. In our case, we actually lowered the priority of the motivator, the gym is wherever you take it, in Q8, to highlight new performance features, a decision that improved brand judgment from 80 to 82. But in a public health-driven market, that health-oriented message would have been a competitive advantage, not a trade-off. Our regional ad spend also could have been targeted more towards health and fitness magazines, which generally had lower costs and directly aligned with public health conscious consumers, improving our margins while strengthening our brand positioning around wellness and lifestyle. In the real world, public health events such as pandemics, rising fuel costs, and supply chain disruptions directly accelerate demand for cycling in specific regions and segments. Companies that anticipate these shifts gain first mover advantage. Those that don't fall behind. In our simulation, we delayed expanding into New York and Tokyo until Q5, missing the opportunity to capture early market share in two of the highest demand cities. We also entered work segment in Q5, which caused our market share to dip from 16% to 12% as competitors had already established themselves. In real-world public health environment, the work segment would have been priority from the start, driven by pandemic-era commuting shifts, reduced public transit use, rising fuel costs, and government cycling infrastructure investment. Consumers in this segment prioritize transport, comfort, low price point, and ease of ride, all directly influenced by public health forces. Anticipating these shifts earlier would have changed everything about how and when we expanded. Finally, public health can be leveraged to build a sustainable competitive advantage. Instead of competing only on price and performance, we could have differentiated our brand by aligning with the broader public health trends, positioning around wellness, outdoor activity, and safe transportation alternatives rather than purely technical specs. This would not only have improved short-term demand, but also strengthened our long-term brand perception, customer loyalty, and overall marketing position. This is evident in our struggle to recover from market share from our Q4 dip, slowly climbing from 12% in Q5 back to the top spot with 18% in Q8. Winning market share did not translate into the best brand judgments, suggesting that in public health-driven market, health-oriented brand positioning could have closed the gap, building not just market share, but lasting customer loyalty.
I want you to think about something for a second. What would you do if demand in your best performing segment doubled overnight, but your supply chain could not keep up? What if the segment you had been ignoring suddenly became the most important one in the market? That's not a hypothetical. That is exactly what happened to real bike companies during COVID-19, and it is what could have happened to us. In our simulation, demand was predictable and stable. We could count on a direct response to every move we made, but the real world does not work that way, and public health forces are one of the biggest reasons why. So, in this section, I'll walk you through 3 alternative marketing strategies that Topaz Carbon Fit could have used to protect itself against public health disruptions. Let us talk about what we're working with in the simulation and how different that is from reality. In the simulation, we had it good. Demand was stable, no supply chain issues, no sudden shifts in consumer behavior, no government policies changing the rules mid-game. We could forecast with confidence and executive precision. In the real world, public health forces blow all of that up. Pandemic spiked demand in some segments while collapsing others. Supply chains break down with almost no warning. Consumers reprioritize safety and wellness overnight. Governments step in with policies that reshape how you operate. And here's the thing, we actually got a small taste of this in Q4. We dropped from number 1 to number 5. Market share fell from 16.2% to 12.9% in a single quarter because we had not planned for competitor aggression. We assumed stability, and it did not hold. In the real world, that kind of drop can be permanent. So let's talk about how you prepare. The first alternate marketing strategy is contingency planning. I know that sounds corporate, but just stick with me because this one is personal for us. A contingency planning framework means you sit down before anything goes wrong and ask, what scenarios could disrupt us? And what is our response to each one? You define trigger points so that when something happens, you're not scrambling, you are executing. For Topaz Carbon Fit, that would have looked like 3 scenarios. First, a pandemic or health crisis. If demand surges in recreation and work, you pre-activate campaigns for those segments, shift messaging to health benefits and outdoor safety, and accelerate e-commerce. You already know what to do. Second, a supply chain disruption. You have backup suppliers identified, a 20% inventory buffer in high demand cities, and a dynamic pricing strategy ready to manage demand without losing revenue. Third, and this one hits home, competitor aggression. Real-time SEM monitoring, automatic bid adjustments, and 15% of your marketing budget held in reserve. You are not caught flat-footed like we were in Q4. Trek Bicycles did this in 2020. They pre-positioned inventory ahead of the pandemic surge and captured 65% year-over-year sales growth, while competitors faced stockouts. This is not luck. That is the plan. The second alternate marketing strategy is flexibility. The way I think about it is do not put your bikes in one basket. In the simulation, we leaned heavily on performance segments, mountain and speed were our main R&D focus from Q5 to Q8. That worked out great in a stable environment. But in a world where public health forces can shift consumer priorities overnight, that concentration is a vulnerability. Flexible marketing means you have built the infrastructure to pivot without starting from scratch. Campaign templates ready for different scenarios. E-commerce as a primary channel, not a backup. B2B partnerships in corporate wellness that give you stable work segment demand even when consumer markets are volatile. On the segment side, we entered work in Q5. It should have been earlier. In the real world, where commuting behavior shifts rapidly due to pandemic health events, the late entry could have cost us significantly more. Specialized bikes shifted 40% of their sales online within 60 days of COVID lockdowns. That was only possible because they had already built the digital infrastructure before they needed it. Flexibility is not a backup plan. It is a strategy you build in advance. The third alternative marketing strategy is the one I find most interesting and the one that connects the most directly to public health as a macro environmental force. Brand resilience means your brand is built around something that matters to people long term, not just in good times. For a bike company operating in a world shaped by public health trends, that something is health. For Topaz Carbon Fit, that means positioning around 3 pillars: physical wellness, cycling as a daily health practice, mental well-being, the outdoor activity and stress relief that comes with it, and community health, sustainable low-emission transportation that is good for cities and people. Here's why the simulation is honest with us. Our brand judgment improved from 71 in Q4 to 82 in Q8. Real progress, but slow. If we had built health-driven positioning from Q1 instead of focusing primarily on performance, that trust would have been compounded earlier. In a public health crisis, consumers default to brands they already trust. We would have had a stronger cushion. Peloton grew 172% during the pandemic. They did not need to pivot. They were already in the wellness brand. The public health crisis did not disrupt them. It validated them. That is what health-driven brand resilience looks like in practice. So let's put it all together. If Topaz Carbon Fit were operating in a real-world environment shaped by public health forces, 3 things would have been true from day one. First, we planned before we need to. Our Q4 drop was not unforeseeable. We just had not planned for it. In the real world, public health disruptions are even less predictable and far more severe. A contingency framework turns panic into protocol, and that is the difference between a recovery and a collapse. Second, we treat flexibility as a strategy, not an afterthought. Diversified channels, diversified segments, pre-built campaign templates. We entered the work segment in Q5. We should have been there in Q2. In the real world, that kind of delay has real cost. And third, we let our brand do the heavy lifting. Our brand judgment lagged our market share the whole way through. Health-driven positioning from the start would have closed that gap faster and given us a loyalty cushion that no competitor aggression could easily undo. The simulation gave us a safe space to make mistakes and learn from them. The real world will not be that forgiving, but these 3 strategies will be.
Together, these 4 sections tell a complete story. Public health forces are real, they're complex, and they're unpredictable. They require companies to plan ahead, stay flexible, and build brands that stand for something beyond the product itself. At the start of this section, Sia asked a question that I want to return to now. What would you do if everything changed overnight? We've spent the last several minutes building an answer to that question, and I think the answer has 3 parts. First, you plan before you need to. Second, you build flexibility into everything. And third, you make sure your brand stands for something that matters to people beyond the product itself. Topaz Carbon Fit finished number 1 in this simulation, and we're proud of that. But the deeper takeaway here isn't the ranking. It's the understanding we've built of what it would take to compete in a world where public health forces are always in play. The strategies are clear, the evidence is real, and the question for every company, including ours, is simply whether they would be ready before they need to be. So, what would you do if everything changed overnight? Now you know what we would do. We're Team Topaz Carbon Fit. Thank you.